Is place still going to matter for economic growth? We'll talk about it today in Conversations ahead of the Introduced Conversation. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, a news organization with a community of entrepreneurs and technologists. Ahead of our Introduced conference on Thursday, May 12th in Philadelphia, we are having conversations around building better companies, both how you do it and where you do it, which is increasingly a conversation coming off of a pandemic-induced world of remote work. Today, we're talking about, does place matter for economic growth, business growth, innovation clusters, a bunch of wonky stuff we'll make more fun. And to do that, I have two people who are quite tied to the local world. Margaret Berger Bradley, she's Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Ben Franklin Technology Partners, which does some state-backed investment. We'll talk about that. And Varsovia Fernandez, she's the Executive Director of PA CDFI Network. We'll talk about that. Margaret Varsovia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. So, Margaret, you guys do investments in and around the state of Pennsylvania. Varsovia, your career has been very tied toward work in and around Philadelphia and the state now of Pennsylvania. But your perspective rings true around the country, if not the world. So let me start off with the easy one. Are you guys quitting your job, focusing on local anytime soon?
I don't know about quitting my jobs, but definitely use my work to actually promote local investment, to promote local growth.
So we're not losing that. You think even though we surged remote work, we recognize global supply chains are such a big part of our world. You don't think this local clustering is going away?
Local is not going away because we identify locally, right? We talked about culture, we talked about trust, we talked about wanting to see the person next door, whether it is in business or in play.
Yeah,
Margaret,
for a place as full and vibrant as Philadelphia has been, to quit on local would be just throwing all of our competitive assets away. I am all about local in a global economy, which is why I hope we're going to talk more about capital, about innovation, about talent, and about culture. Those are the things that we need to be doubling down on and building out locally.
Your central logic being people got to live somewhere, even if a small segment of businesses, I think these numbers are typically maybe 15% of overall work hours will take place remotely, which is an enormous tripling from pre-pandemic levels, if not more. But for a portion of our fastest growth companies in this era of digital transformation, in and around software, that is a sliver of businesses that Ben Franklin Technology Partners has invested in, that many innovation clusters around the world have cared about. They are leading the pack in more remote work, more distributed teams. Even though that sliver of businesses may deprioritize local, you guys are telling me you don't think that's predictive that other industries are going to follow a deprioritizing of local. Is that right, Margaret? Like, is that something that you're making?
I'm going to go both ways on this. One is I don't think that's predictive, but the other is I think that's what creates opportunity for us. We know that in Philadelphia, it's felt like it's gotten a lot more expensive to live here. But comparing it to New York and Boston and other cities that we've always coveted the kind of tech ecosystem and the tech resources of, we are a very affordable place to be. And so if we can attract the talent to Philadelphia, we'll create all the more vibrant of an innovation economy here in our own hometown.
I also think that different industries have different needs. Different businesses have different needs. We also have diverse workforce, right? Some of us are not going to be able to do the work fully remotely. Some of us are going to need to be in the office for whatever reason, whatever the job demands or the industry demand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear that the majority of work hours will remain in offices. Some of this idea of like prediction that I think is important for us to be thinking about is in a lot of ways those highest growth companies in and around digital transformation have made predictions about how things happen. They were early in a talent demand. Now that, of course, there is no industry that is not talking about talent demands. There's a lot of reasons right now, but there are often predictions coming out of fast growth software companies in and around digital transformation because of the moment we are in. And I think we at Technically are interested, is that supposed to be telling us or signaling something to us right now around building economic development strategies at a regional level or thinking about capital allocation? Let's talk about capital allocation, as both of you guys do a lot of work around that. The evolution of private financing of business has been very geographically tied for hundreds of years. This idea was pooling local capital in and around business growth. There were lots of reasons that made sense, but there's a slow march of virtual tools that are making it easier for us to do work. There's lots of anecdotal examples of the last couple of years about how much easier it was to convince people to get on a video call and finance a business with purely due diligence over the internet. You guys still think capital allocations in and around geography is going to stick around? Are we going to get my first funding from my neighbor?
Are you going to get your first funding from your neighbor? I don't know if it's a story. Yeah. Is it a question of geography or is it a question of loyalty and familiarity? I don't know if I need to always frame it as geography, but in the kind of work that Ben Franklin does, where we're investing in really young ventures in our region, we can do that in part because we can know these companies well. Other angels that work like that are investing in companies where they can know those companies well. I'm hopeful that some of these things open up as we can attract more capital to the companies that we invest in, but we're still missing an opportunity to attract dollars that could be loyal and could be familiar to the growth of companies in our region. You may know this data too, but the vast majority of our companies in the Ben Franklin portfolio get 80%. All companies get 80% of their capital follow on, not from Philly region. And it's not because there aren't dollars here. So there's still plenty to do to build out kind of the local, the familiar, and the loyal to Philadelphia growth capital that we could be building out.
I think there's also an element of trust in this, right? In the 90s, everybody bootstrapped. Most technology companies that came out of Philadelphia bootstrapped, and then you had, the Safeguard Scientifics of the world and the venture funds and so forth. And then you went to friends and family and venture capital and all of this stuff. And I think that, there is an evolution, but there is an element of trust in this, which is we have an American dream as business owners, right? So you dream of building a small technology company or whatever the business is. And it may be that your friends and family help you pull the straps and help you fund this business. And that is a local investment. Next stage of growth, you go to Montgomery County instead of Philadelphia County for the money, right? You're still in the region, you're still growing, and so forth. And what that does is it builds trust locally. It allows other funders, other investors to come and help you grow the business. And in building such trust, you build customer loyalty, you build communities.
Varsovia, I want to come back to this point of community, but before that clarification, Margaret, do you? This is an offhanded question, but do you know how unfamiliar do most regional cities not get a lot of follow-on funding locally? Is Philadelphia unusual in that, or does the Philadelphia example look like other regional cities?
Yeah, I think Philadelphia is not that unusual with it. What is unusual is that for a city of resources like Philadelphia, we aren't bringing enough of Philly dollars. My favorite, favorite bit of data was the year that the Eagles played the Patriots in the Super Bowl, and then in Philadelphia we invested in more companies than they had invested in Boston, in large part because Ben Franklin invests in 90% of those companies that were captured in that analysis. But Boston had 10 times the capital that Philadelphia had. And so some of that
fewer bigger deals. Is fewer bigger deals? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, fewer bigger deals. And we have some big winners. We have double the capital that ever has been invested in this past year. It was over 7 million, and the best was never over 7 billion, and the best was never over 3 before. But it's going into a really small handful of companies. Our younger companies are still telling us that they're famished. I have companies that say, someone's luring me to Atlanta, particularly companies that are led by underrepresented founders. But there's a lot of hunger in that earlier stage of development among companies in our tech ecosystem here.
Do you think that luring will still happen? I mean, let me put it like this. I wonder how much we should be focusing on the people as opposed to the companies. Like, has something shifted now and is a priority? I mean, you guys have both talked about talent being so important to both of your work on the CDFI level and the FTB. Is the people the focus over the companies now in this era of economic development?
I think it's both and in a way that it never was before. Typically, and we're aging ourselves a little bit with this, but I've done a lot of work in the workforce systems too. And typically the world of economic development and workforce development never come together. But you can't do that right now because the city of Philadelphia should be as excited to attract capital, to attract talent from elsewhere who work in Philly and pay taxes in Philly, or companies that reside in Philly and hire in Philly, or hire from wherever they may hire. So I think it's really a joint strategy. I know PACT is putting its head into this as well, is figuring out how do we make this a story of how do we attract talent and attract and retain companies.
Varsovia, let's turn a little bit to community. I only have a few more minutes with you guys. You've used that word community a couple times. CDFI, the CDFI network is obviously a brilliant example of pooling capital in new and unusual ways for an array of different businesses. We are largely talking in and around technology and related businesses. You do a lot of work across industries. How do you think those worlds fit in terms of building community? Like your view of business climate obviously is a lot of different companies of a lot of different sizes and scales. What's your view of the relationship between these advanced technology companies down to the full range of companies you're thinking about?
Well, we work to increase access to capital for these organizations, right? Whether it's an entrepreneur, whether it is an established business. And the relationship goes between, developing locally, giving back locally, circulating the dollar locally, right? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Well,
yeah. We look to invest to grow this business to be a larger employer. You grow from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 to 10. You're out of the CDFI business and you go into equity.
Mm-hmm. There's some wonderful ways that our worlds, I say our worlds, I lived in that world of Varsovia's in for many years as well, but where these two worlds come together far more significantly than they ever used to, because these companies, these brick and mortar companies, were so behind in so many ways when the pandemic struck. And there are a lot of technologies, and there's some wonderful public resources that have gone into this too, to help get these companies positioned with the tech resources they need, the e-commerce ability, the ordering ability, Toast Tab, pick your favorite. And we've got several from the Ben portfolio working in these areas directly. But technology matters to those neighborhood businesses in a way that it mattered several years ago, but it wasn't attended to several years ago.
Yeah, Varsovia, we're going to add to that?
I was just going to say that there is an incredible opportunity to build technology locally to help those businesses prosper across communities. Mm-hmm.
And I think I've covered the agglomeration effects of economic and innovation clusters for 15 years. And I think there was always an interesting tension that one of the inherent promises of building software or web-based businesses is the replicability. That is the central idea. Can you build something that then with each additional user, there's the marginal costs reduce, and that is why something like Ben Franklin Technology Partners exists. The idea that if we can put $1 in, this company can have global success. They can do things that you just can't in a much more services oriented way. So there's always this tension of, we were talking about companies that should build and grow globally, but it was a deeply local conversation because they were largely hiring people from local meetups, or they were getting some of their first customers. We at Technically have done some reporting about how often that company's first customer might be within a short drive of where they were. I am wondering how much that has shifted and whether it has already changed under our feet and we just haven't fully realized whether it is necessary to be within drive distance of your first customer, and whether your first employee has to be within your own city, and will you hire from that place anymore? And you might push on me and say that's just a very specific kind of business or not. But when I think about, does place matter now or next, that's what's in my mind. And you guys both do such interesting work. I feel like you are thinking about 5 years from now, how is this playing out for me?
When you ask the question about whether place matters, the reason I'm so emphatic that it does is that it has to. Philadelphia has so much work to do to bring along so many who've been left behind in employability, with the kind of skills they need for the kinds of jobs that these tech companies will bring 5-10 years from now. I think the lines are porous. I totally agree with you. I'm not sure if the client needs to be down the street or not, but the strategies that we need to be employing, whether we are the mayor of this city, whether we're a private investor, a civic organization, or an entrepreneur, are strategies about leveraging this place. We know that every tech job creates another 5 jobs. So I want entrepreneurs to want to be here because I want those jobs to be here. I know every dollar is $4 to the state when we invest, and we want it to be here. So it's a little bit that I'm willing it to be so, but I think the policies need to support it so that growing here is the most fertile soil.
Let me just push, and I know I got to wrap us up here in a second, and I want to get another word from Varsovia too. But Margaret, you say such an interesting point. I can't not ask it. One of the themes of Technically's reporting the last couple of years is we're talking, as you'd expect out of us, hundreds of founders across all the cities we report in. And it's a very similar conversation in each of these cities. And one of the examples that frankly worries me as a resident of one of these cities is I do think there's a kind of high-performing founder who is a good bet on because they are maniacally focused on the core problem they're trying to solve. And for a while there, we were having success convincing those founders, those CEOs, as business leaders, that they had to care about their hometown because their staff was going to get on the L, or they were going to live in communities. And so it really mattered that these highest performing, most privileged residents had to care about where their companies were. I am worried that changed a little bit and has shifted in the last couple of years. And a class of founder has gotten off to be able to say, whether they mean it or not, because frankly, I think many of them in my conversations don't even necessarily know it, but they are so focused on their core problem objective that they just wiped out of their head needing to worry about where their employees live. And that, I'm off the rails here a bit on a very civic thread, but that's something that I'm sure interested in. And that's not quite either of your business objectives. So maybe I'm more asking you guys as people, if that's at all in your own calculus and thinking about what has shifted.
Yeah. I think about that a lot. When I came to Philadelphia, there was a kind of a central leadership council of company leaders who were thinking about, the city because they cared about this. When my old boss, Jeremy Nowak, and Bruce Katz wrote a book called The New Localism, they spoke about different kinds of cities and how they worked, and cities where people came together to get stuff done. And at the time, they didn't put Philadelphia in that category. And so I'm extra concerned because we have some phenomenal leaders and younger leaders and tech-inspired businesses, people like Will Reynolds, who is all that, entrepreneurs and business people from all walks. But there will be more people who opt out. But we don't. There will be more people who opt out. But that's a short-term gain. depending on what we want to do.
I want to go back to the evolution conversation, Chris, that you started earlier, because I think there is a process. I think that local still matters. I think that it does matter. It matters because of where we live. You're not going to have all of the Philadelphia region moved out, in the next year because they can work from the beach. It's not going to happen that way. I think that we have too much at stake to just pack our bags and go and say, I can do everything over the wire, because we can't. I want to get my nails done. I want to get my hair done. I want to go to the farmer's market. I want to see my neighbor, and those things are going to keep us engaged and work. The workplace is going to be part of that. And yes, technology needs to come up to speed as well. You cannot do everything over the wire. So I think that it does matter. I think that we identify with our culture, where we belong. I belong in the Philadelphia region. That's where I am right now. I have no intention of moving down to the shore so that I can work remotely. I want to, again, I want to go to those places that I mentioned, so forth. So I am convinced that there is an evolutionary process for this to do. I am also convinced that we will become far better if we rally up capital investment in the region locally, engaging everyone, collaborating, and being able to just grow.
Yeah, Chris, for that maniacal founder you're describing, I wish her well. There is a place here in Philadelphia for leaders who have a day hat of their business, but also are game to put on a hat that's a civic hat too. So I delight that you put both hats on every day, as do Varsovia and I, but there's plenty of company and plenty of room for people to put on their civic hat for the strength of this region.
Margaret, I think that's actually a great way to wrap up our conversation. Thank you guys so much. Varsovia Fernandez from the PA CDFI Network, and Margaret Berger Bradley from Berger Technology Partners. Thanks for having this conversation about whether place matters. I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
This is the next of our conversations ahead of our Introduced conference. You either getting this as an attendee, so we'll see you Thursday, May 12th, or this is after the conference, which means right here, there's probably a little video where you can click and get the full recap, a full range of Introduced conversations, in addition to other big conversations around building better companies, how we do it, and where. We'll put some links here below the video to other resources that relate to both these organizations and the overall conference. Varsovia, Margaret, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. See you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.